Good evening, friend. I see you've wandered into another tavern, and I can't help but wonder, what do you hope to hear from the bards this evening?
Moriden Athluan.
Tonight, dear listeners, I tell you the tale of Moriden Stormcrown, the Dragonborn of the Fourth Era.
Using his mastery of magic, Moriden faced down the Mad Mage Ancano and prevented him from tapping power that would have ended the world.
Bah, master of magic indeed.
Through his cleverness, his strength of arms, and the power of his voice, he had captured the mighty Odahviing and forced it to reveal the location of dreaded Alduin.
Stepping through the veil, he entered the hallowed halls of Sovngarde itself and battled the World Eater, destroying the beast and saving all of Nirn for a second time.
Not that anyone noticed at the time. I sometimes wonder why I bothered.
Now, top off your ales and listen as I tell of his time among the mighty companions of Skyrim and his rise to power as their harbinger.
You have got to be kidding me. There is almost no chance that they know what happened among the companions, let alone all the time I spent gathering political power to myself. No, they have it all wrong. You, though, you seem almost desperate to hear the story. What is it you are looking for, I wonder? Well, since you want the story so bad and we seem to have time, why not order us a couple of drinks and I'll tell you the truth of that time. The truth, mind you. Not that drivel that bard up there is embarrassing themselves with. Because the truth... the truth is not what the bards would have you believe. Eight Morningstar, 4th Era, 202. Given the four bodies I'd already seen, caution and extreme awareness were obviously the way forward. I moved as quietly as I could through the underbrush, but I could only move so far from the pathway that ran through the area. This is Sinding's home territory, and he would know all of the places to watch, the places to observe. This became quickly apparent as I caught sight of him on a high promontory overlooking the path of the camp. He was within range, so I took the shot. I know I hit him, for I could see him double over in pain. I even heard him cry out in pain, but he turned as though it were nothing and vanished into the brush. Now he knows there is another hunter to contend with, which will make him all the more dangerous as I pursue him. High above the grotto's main ground levels, I found Sinding's resting place. There wasn't much to work with, but I knew he'd retreated here. The blood trail confirmed my hit and his path. Following it led me back out and into the eastern half of the grotto. I descended, and as I did, I could hear the shouts of other hunters calling out to each other. I was not the only hunter still alive. That wasn't true a few moments later, as I heard the cry of the werewolf and the screams of the dying echo in the grotto. Minutes later, I found the grisly evidence of their deaths. 3, possibly 4 more dead hunters. 3 for certain, but the 4th might have been made of chunks of the other 3. I knew I was getting close. Another set of shouts and screams, this time very close by, told me that now was the time for utmost caution. I crossed a small stream, turned wide around a corner of rocks, and spied my quarry once again. He stood there, still hovering over his 3 most recent kills, perfectly positioned for my second and fatal arrow shot. Sinding the werewolf is dead. It took near an hour to slowly slice and peel his skin from his body, as I would a deer or stag. I wanted no possibility of Lord Hircine turning me into the next hunting target. And so, though the task was grisly, I did it as coolly and calmly as I could. My hands, I noticed, did not even shake. The task completed, the avatar of Hircine appeared once again and lauded me for the hunt. The ring was taken from me, and the skin I'd peeled from the body of the werewolf changed in my hands into one of Hircine's artifacts, the Savior's Hide. That done, and his favor now secured, Hircine vanished. I returned to the first campsite and slept for a couple of hours. I had thought that this hunt, the deliberate hunt of a man for no reason other than I was told to, would haunt me somewhat, as it had with Orkendor and Periite. I found, however, no such qualms. I slept the sleep of the righteous and innocent. After a good rest, I almost managed to return to Falkreath. I still had a dog to find for the blacksmith, the last thing, I hoped, that would make me well enough known to become Thane of Falkreath. I doubt that my workings with Sindig will endear me to anyone there, even if it meant that the girl's killer is now dead. Nearing the gates, I found the dog, or rather, he found me. Barbas is no ordinary dog. Talking was my first indication, although the brightly glowing blue eyes were a close second indication. If I needed a third, then the all-too-familiar feeling of a Daedric Lord's attention was there as well, although strangely muted or distant. The reasons for this became apparent as Barbas basically hired me to settle a dispute between himself and his master, Clavicus Vile. I'd forgotten about Vile's dog, honestly. To hear tell, Barbas serves as Lord Vile's conscience, if you can believe it. Lord Vile is the master of the deal, always twisting the deal to his amusement and the other's detriment. Barbas's advice is good. I shall not be trusting a single thing he offers me. And when I get back, I'm going to need a tactful way to tell Lord that this dog is not something he wants. Lord Vile's nearest, and only, shrine is up in the mountains, off of the pass between Helgen and the Rift, a place called Hamar's Shame. It was only a short hour or two of riding to get there, and then the two of us dove into the cave to speak with his master. The cave was full of vampires. I'll give Barbas this much: he's a force to reckon with in battle. He might be a dog, but he's also a supernatural dog companion of a major Daedric Lord. He's seen a few fights, and he knows how to use those teeth of his. And the fact that he is a good sight larger than a standard dog doesn't hurt either. What he can't do is be quiet and stealthy, which led to the fights being longer and more drawn out than they needed to be. Yet another reason I try not to bring others with me. They only slow me down. Eventually, and over the dead bodies of a rather surprising number of vampires, I found Lord Vile's shrine. I made the request to reunite Barbas with him and got a flat rejection. He wanted nothing to do with the dog, even if it did mean being confined to a back-end-of-nowhere shrine with limited worshippers or possibilities for bargains. That, of course, was what I needed. I pointed out, brutally, I might add, that being stuck here was no different than exile. It was his own choice, his own fault that led to this, and the boredom that went with it. Vile relented, somewhat. A bargain was needed, of course, though he made it clear that there would be no messy surprises for me at the end. I am to head to Rimerock Burrow in Harfinger to retrieve an axe he described as powerful enough to have quite a bit of fun. While that bothers me somewhat, the fun he has in mind will not, by his own sworn word, for what that's worth, end up being a problem for me. I want this dog gone and Vile out of my life as well. I convinced Barbas to stay here. Call it a petty revenge on Vile for making me do petty work. It was still an hour or so before sundown when I arrived at the burrow. From what Lord Vile has told me, combined with a few parting words from Barbas, I didn't figure on this taking long. The axe in question had been a gift to a mage calling himself Sebastian Lort, part of a bargain between him and Lord Vile. The mage's daughter had turned to worshipping Hircine, and, as many of his worshippers do, eventually became a shapeshifter. A werewolf. Though I cannot say from my own experience, I doubt many fathers want to look at their little girls and see a monster instead. Thus the mage asked Lord Vile for a way to cure her curse. The axe was the reply. Lord Vile has a dark sense of humor, it seems. Since Lord never used the axe, I am here to retrieve it, and a mage, on his own, has never been a problem for me. Thus it turned out to be. The axe was retrieved quickly, and I began the trek back to Hamar's Shame. I may have to stop off along the way, however. I have no mind to be stuck in a mountain pass after nightfall, especially not in the winter. 9 Morning Star, 4th Era, 202. I made for Solitude and spent the evening there. Many of the explorers are still returning to the guild house, so there was nothing of import to discuss, though I had several new items for display. According to Aryan, we have well over 1,400 separate items for the locals to wander over, far beyond what most can boast about. I have to admit that the place still seems empty, but I figure I can deal with that in time. Leaving for Hamar's Shame, I was stopped by a man dressed in what appeared to be a complete set of ebony armor. It was impressive. Less so were his words. This ebony warrior claims that he has reached the pinnacle of combat prowess, that he has no quests, no adventures, nothing left to keep him going, and that only I can send him to Sovngarde, for reasons he didn't bother to explain. Instead, he challenged me to combat in a place he calls his vigil. I'll meet him there if for no other reason than to keep him from looking for me again elsewhere. I have no idea who he is, but if he wants to die, who am I to deny him? Besides, that armor would look amazing in the museum. The ride back to Hamar's Shame was more or less uneventful. Lord Vile, however, was true to his nature when I returned. His attempt to get me to keep the axe by having me kill Barbas was almost comical. Of all the lords I've dealt with to this point, Vile is the one that seems to me to be the most childish, especially when his will is resisted. He took his dog back, but only because the deal we'd made required him to. With Barbas back at his side, he is also restored to his full powers, meaning he can go search for fun elsewhere, which I imagine he is off to do now, though he did leave some vague threats about turning me into a worm or some such. I don't imagine he has power enough, even at his best, to affect others if they had not welcomed the deal. Once made, though, he has all the power he needs to twist it to his amusement. Since that wasn't the case here, well, he has better things to do. Rather than return to Falkreath and close this whole dog thing out with Lod, though, I'm heading deeper into the Reach. That warrior from this morning has my attention. Not something that might be healthy for him, which might be the point in the first place. The last vigil, presumably the home of this wandering ebony warrior, is located high on the mountainside, not too distant from Riften. It is moderately impressive, certainly remote, and likely everything that the warrior wanted in a home. Once I was close enough, it was hard to miss, so I took the steps upwards to find the warrior standing on the main landing. When he saw me, there were no words. He stood, gave a respectful head nod, drew his sword, and did his level best to end my existence. Contrary to what I had believed would be the case, he was no pushover. Perhaps it was his armor, ebony, as I had noted earlier, and finely crafted. Perhaps it was his weapons, also, thematically, of ebony. His ability to use the unrelenting force shout was certainly a surprise. Once I realized how much of a fight this was going to be, I let everything loose and called down the storms. My victory was all but assured, though. A tough combatant, I will give him that. He knew his weapons, his tactics, everything that makes an honorable warrior, or a knight, really, the forces that they can be on the battlefield. This also, however, was what ultimately led to his downfall. Honor. Though his name is not, and likely never will be, known, the Ebony Warrior has always been seen as a champion of the people. For no pay, no credit, no acknowledgement at all, he has done many of the same acts that I have. He did them honorably, bound by some set of codes or morals. He would no more think of breaking those rules than he would think of not breathing. I, on the other hand, had no such problems. Where for a noble and honorable warrior such as he, poisons would be out of the question, for me, they are the entry requirements. Never give anyone an even break. Take all advantages that you can. Over time, the constant effects of the poisons I employed finally wore him down, and he was granted his wish. Death. The Ebony Warrior is dead, and his home and possessions are now mine. I did only the barest of explorations of my new property. It was stately enough, but unlike the previous owner, I found it to be too remote to bother with. I took what few valuables I believed worth keeping and then took to the roads. By the time I reached Falkreath again, the sun was down and the sky fires were out and bright. A tiring day. But I had one more thing yet to do tonight, and at this hour, Lod was to be found at the inn, which, since I was heading there myself, was very convenient. I found him just finishing a meal with one of the other locals. Lod is a big believer in loyalty. Proving my own to him through the finishing of this seemingly minor task of locating a dog for him had seemed a fair move when I began. I also believed it best to be honest with the man, brutally so. I started the tale with a simple statement, that the dog was far more trouble than he'd believe. Once the entire story was told, he was shaking his head. I'm still not sure if in amazement at a tale involving a Daedric Lord, or at the lengths he thought I might go through to avoid bringing him back a companion animal. Either way, though, it is finished, and I retired for the evening. 10 Morning Star, 4th Era, 202. I was woken by a knock on the door and a summons from the Jarl of Falkreath. I couldn't help but smile slightly. Though it had been far more work than I had believed I would have to do, I had called the Jarl's bluff, and it was time to pay up. The Jarl was holding court already when I arrived, and on seeing me he called everyone's attention and made the announcement. Thane Moriden Athluan, the Dragonborn, all the rights and privileges and so forth and so on. I didn't wait around much, however, instead making arrangements with my new housecarl, Rhea, a red guard woman with a fierce aspect, to see to the building of a new home. Really, the home was more of a status symbol than anything I wanted or needed. I had more important things to do, starting with making sure that the guild's first outpost was built. I used my influence to ensure a plentiful supply of lumber, and then set out to the new outpost site in the middle of the northern glacial fields. As when the guild headquarters had been built, there was little for me to do other than help with finishing touches. I hadn't thought much of this plan when it was presented to me, but now that I've seen what we planned for these outposts, the convenience of a place to stop or rest out in some of the more desolate regions of Skyrim, I begin to see their value. The workers were given their pay, and a few mercenaries were enlisted to watch over the place when none of the guild were in active residence, at a fairly high price, I might add, given it would require them to live out here on the ice sheets. With those details dealt with, I rode for Solitude, to catch up on recent events within the guild, and to plan my next activities. The homecoming was far more eventful than I had anticipated. It started with seeing someone that might, I suppose, be called an old acquaintance. As I entered the museum, he was in the Hall of Heroes, and the old Khajiit lit up as if he had just seen a glorious sight. And while I flatter myself to think I am not ugly, I'm not sure my looks would be enough to lighten a face that much. The fight in Elsweyr against the Thalmor continues unabated. Several more of the airships we saw there have been captured, including one that the resistance there have decided to refit, rearm, and make a gift of to me. The Devaveza is now mine to use here in Skyrim, and the only reason it hadn't gotten here sooner was the time it took to fly the thing here. I accepted it with as much good grace as I could muster. The thought of flying through all that open air, it makes me shiver in a way that even Alduin never did. I'll have to at least go aboard at some point, I suppose, but if I can actually avoid flying on her, I will. Immediately on the heels of that announcement, Aryan pulled me aside and handed me yet another new weapon. This one, it appears, is the Sword of Ancient Tongues, and while I'm sure the old Altmer could have told me every detail of its existence from the day it was forged, I had no interest in that. Indeed, I almost dismissed the weapon out of hand, as I had many of the others donated to the museum in the past. Almost. First, when I touched the weapon, there was some kind of... I don't even know how to describe it. Were the blade alive, and thinking I might call it a kind of recognition. Seeing my surprise, Aryan explained two things. First, that the weapon might be the finest work that Eorlin Greymane had ever restored. Not made, but restored. Second, the weapon had been designed for the use of a Dragonborn. As much as I've loved my axe of Dragonbone, this weapon just became my closest friend. Though it seems somewhat unremarkable, there is something to this weapon that is yet to be revealed. Next, I tried to tell Professor Marazi that the outpost had been completed, but he was too busy trying to tell me about the next expedition, this time to the Dwemer ruin of Urkund in the Rift. Most of the guild had already departed, and the rest were on the professor's heels as he left with barely an explanation, leaving me in the guild house, alone and very perplexed. I enjoy a good Dwemer ruin as much as the next adventurer, which is to say with a healthy dose of caution and dread, but the guild just traipsed off as if it would be just another walk through a park somewhere. Naturally, I'm all but obligated to show up and keep them from getting themselves killed. With all the surprises dealt with, I made my way to the armory, where the Falkreath display had been dressed up somewhat to celebrate my status as Thane there. Looking at it, and the matching finery of the Whiterun display, made me think. The Ebony Warrior had said he had little left to accomplish in his life. Was I rapidly approaching the same position? As I looked at the 7 other hold displays, the undecorated ones, I decided the answer was no. I had 2 more things at least that I could still chase. The first was something I'd been chasing for quite some time now. Or had they been chasing me? The Daedric Lords were still out there. And though many had found me and made use of me, perhaps it was time to look for and use those who had yet avoided me. Their artifacts were ones of power, perhaps power that I could make my own, and thus fill me with purpose again. Showing up in every hold looking for the Daedra, however, that would draw attention I didn't want. Again, the hold displays caught my attention, and I smiled. Political power, and the people who sought it, was something anyone could understand. I was relatively sure that both Whiterun and Falkreath were cleansed of any Daedric influence now, but the others... I could gain power in 2 ways by following this path. And, if nothing else, there were still the companions of Whiterun, but first, I would reduce myself to the 3rd oldest profession in the world. Watch out, Skyrim. Moriden is about to go political.